All right, this is Northern Oklahoma College Algebra, Math 1513. I'm on Chapter 2, Lesson 1. We are graphing equations by finding the x and y intercepts. Now, what is an x and y intercept? An x-intercept is just where my line crosses the x-axis. So right there, where I cross the x-axis, that's my x-intercept. And if I continue on upward, right there, where I cross the y-axis, that's my y-intercept. Now look at the coordinates of my x-intercept. The address of that point is 1, 2, 3, 4 steps to the left and no steps up or down. So -4, 0. That's my x-intercept. And my y-intercept is no steps left or right, so 0. And then 1, 2, 3, 4 steps up. So its address is 0, 4. And that's my y-intercept. So what I want you to look at is these zeros right here. Okay? We're going to use this property of x-intercepts and y-intercepts to calculate them without making a graph. So to find x-intercept, look over here. If you want to know what the x-intercept is, just make your y-coordinate equal 0. So you set y equal to 0 and solve. And to find the y-intercept, look up here. If you want to find the y-intercept, you just got to make your x equal to 0 and solve. Alright, so let's say I have this equation. Now I've written it twice because I'm going to use one equation to find the x-intercept and the other to find the y-intercept. So let's say I'm looking for the x-intercept. That means I'm going to make my y equal 0. So I'm going to take out my y, and remember, anytime you take out a letter and put in a number, use parentheses. So I'm going to take out my y and put in the 0, and just bring the rest down. And I want to solve that equation now. 4 times 0, that's 0. So I have 3x plus 0 equals 15. Well, 3x plus 0, that's 3x. And I divide both by 3. So my x-intercept equals 5. That means it's going to cross the x-axis at 5. Now let's work on the y-intercept. To find the y-intercept, I'm going to set the x equal to 0. Now again, remember to use parentheses when you're taking a letter out and putting a number in. So 3 times 0 plus 4y equals 15. We want to work this out and see what y equals. 3 times 0 is 0. So I have 4y equals 15. And after I divide each side by 4, I have y equals 15 over 4. So it's going to cross my x-axis at the number 5, and it's going to cross my y-axis at the number 15 over 4, which is almost 4. It's like 3 3/4. Another way to think about that would be my x-intercept would be 5 for the x-coordinate and 0 for the y-coordinate. And my y-coordinate, my y-intercept, would be 0 for the x-coordinate and 15 over 4 for the y-coordinate. Okay, so what would that look like on a graph? My x-intercept was 5. That means on the x, my line's going to cross the x-axis at 5, and my y-intercept was 15/4, which is like 3 3/4. So 1, 2, 3 3/4. We'll call that right about there. So my line's going to go through my x and y intercept. Another thing I want you guys to be aware of is the x and y intercepts are easy to spot in a table. If you have 0 for your x, then whatever that y value is next to the 0, that must be your y-intercept. And if you have 0 for your y, then whatever that number is by the y, that must be your x-intercept. So you can spot x and y intercepts in a table very easily just by looking for the zeros. Now, something we have to be careful of is absolute value equations and x squared, y squared equations, because they have different shapes. They're not exactly a line. For example, an absolute value equation, you guys remember that's a V shape? So if we have a v-shaped absolute value equation, we're actually going to have two x-intercepts. And if it happens to go the other way, let's say it goes like this, we have two y-intercepts. So we have to be careful on the absolute value and quadratic equations. A quadratic equation, an x squared equation, a simple x squared equation looks like this, and we have two x-intercepts. But it could just as easily be turned this way, and we have two y-intercepts. So be careful when you see absolute value or x squared, y squared. Alright, so here we have an absolute value equation. In the first one, I'm going to take out my x and make it a 0. And in the second one, I'm going to take out my y and make it a 0. So let's bring everything else down. Alright, so I have 0 equals absolute value of y minus 2. Now I need to get that absolute value of y alone. I need to isolate the y, and the y is in absolute value brackets. So let's get it alone. So I have the absolute value of y equals 2. Now what I'm basically asking is, what number is 2 steps away from 0? Because remember, absolute value is a measure of distance. It's a measure of distance from 0. So think about the number line. Here's my number line. Here's 0. And I want to know what number is 2 steps away from 0. Well, it could be 2, but negative 2 is also 2 steps away from 0. So my answer here is y equals 2, comma, negative 2. I actually have two y-intercepts on this one. Now let's work out the x-intercept. I bring down the x equals and the minus 2. The absolute value of 0 is simply 0. That's easy. 0 is 0 steps away from 0. And 0 minus 2 gives me negative 2. So x equals negative 2 is my x-intercept. Alright, what does this mean? That means I have two y-intercepts. One is at the number 2, one is at the number negative 2. And I have one x-intercept, and my x-intercept was at negative 2. And so there's what my absolute, there's what my absolute value graph looks like. Remember, absolute value graphs are V-shaped. We just don't know which way the V is going. Now that we've plotted our x and y intercepts, we can see that the V opens up to the right. Alright, here's another tricky one to solve. If I'm looking for my x-intercept, I would make y 0. So I'm going to use parentheses, replace the y with 0, and bring everything down. Over here, if I'm looking for my y-intercept, I'll make x 0. So I'll replace the x with 0 using parentheses and bring everything down. Now let's solve this. On the left, I have x squared equals 9. So I square root both sides. Now remember, when I square root, I always have two answers. I have a positive and a negative answer, and the square root of 9 is 3. So my x-intercept is positive 3 or negative 3. I have two x-intercepts. Over here, 0 squared is 0, plus y squared equals 9. I square root. Remember, anytime you take a square root, you have a positive and a negative answer. So on the y-intercept as well, I have a y-intercept of positive 3 and a y-intercept of negative 3. Now later on, you guys are going to learn that when you see x squared plus y squared like this, you're talking about a circle, sometimes an ellipse. Alright, so what does our answer mean? We had an x-intercept of 3 and negative 3, and we had a y-intercept of 3 and negative 3. We know that this is a circle. There's our x and y intercepts. So beware of absolute value of x and beware of x squareds and y squareds, because we're talking about multiple intercepts.